The media is desperate to pander to the riots, and I think I know why. Two big reasons. The first, their ratings are in free fall. They did great during COVID. They did great during Russiagate, and now they're collapsing. Then they started covering the riots, and what happened? Rioters showed up to CNN HQ and trashed the place. So now they're desperately trying to defend them. I got a couple stories for you. The first one is from Newsbusters. TV journalists defend, excuse 5 nights of riots. How about this headline? New York Times changes its front page after being ripped for being too fair to Trump in coverage of threat to use military in U.S. cities. And that's it. They're bending over for the riots. They are terrified of the violence, and the violence always wins. What I think we are headed to, we've got an immovable object and an unstoppable force. Donald Trump won't back down. He's going to do what he has to do to stop the riots. Meanwhile, leftists are just claiming it's only protests. They're purposefully misframing things, and I'm just standing here watching it all. The left doesn't know or care what anyone else but them thinks. They live in bubbles where they share fake news and they get fed refuse through the orifice of the media into their mouths. I'll keep it a little bit clean, even though it's not really. The point is, I'm seeing tweets from progressives who used to be never Biden, now fully on board for Biden. And my question is, what's confusing is how all of a sudden they now no longer understand the problem of the establishment and the Democrats. It's all of a sudden, well, Trump is doing all of these problems. It's like they're not even paying attention to what's really happening. When Trump says he's going to send out the military, what do? They say Trump is threatening protests. Well, Trump specifically was talking about violent riots. Why doesn't the left know this? I don't know, man. I don't know. Why don't they know that innocent people are having their lives destroyed? Maybe it's because the New York Times will change their headline, bending over backwards and beyond, because the violent threats are pointed at them. And that's it, man. Terror works. Trump won't back down. So then what? A bunch of crazy people on the left have no idea what's happening. And you know what's going to happen? They're going to keep supporting the riots because they don't realize how much damage it's causing. Well, let's read the story. Newsbuster says, from the start, TV news media have done their darndest to paint the riots happening across the country in a positive light. While many journalists have glossed over the widespread violence by relying on misleading characterizations like mostly peaceful, others have outright defended and justified the rioting. Some of these attempts to sanitize the rioting have been bordered on parody. For a sampling of the media's most desperate damage control, watch the video below. This one's truly hilarious. MSNBC host Ali Velshi stood in front of a burning building and absurdly refused to describe the scene as unruly. That's a descriptor more appropriately reserved for a hyper kindergarten class than for felonious arson. But evidently, even that soft language was a bridge too far for Velshi. I want to be clear in how I characterize this. This was mostly a protest. It is not, generally speaking, unruly, but fires have been started. Why is he saying it? In some of these riots, journalists have had bottles cracked over their heads. So the journalists are now espousing to their cable TV audiences that everything is fine. These aren't riots, they're peaceful protests. Why? They don't want to get beaten up. And they want the ratings. You see, what's really happening is that news organizations are suffering. They've been suffering for a long time, and they become desperate to make money. The New York Times writes, record ratings and record chaos on cable news. Truly amazing story. CNBC is looking to host right-wing talk shows. I kid you not. That's how desperate they are for ratings. I want to show you a few more of the absurdities. They say TV journalists have a lengthy track record of excusing mob behavior, ostensibly motivated by racial grievances. Now, this we understand, but you get the gist. Don Lemon of CNN deemed the riots mechanisms for some sort of change. We saw on a segment with Chris Cuomo, he defended this. They call it the language of the unheard. What's really going on is pure desperation. This story from the New York Times by Ben Smith is actually really, really fascinating. They mention how MSNBC, their ratings were incredible during Russiagate. Absolutely incredible. I wonder if I don't want to read literally everything because he just gets to the good points. But let's check this out. MSNBC, the guy we just saw defending the riots, calling them mostly peaceful. He worked for MSNBC. Ben Smith writes, they've been scrambling in a different way. The channel thrived from 2017 until earlier this year, lifted by its nonstop coverage of the Trump-Russia story and the story's denouement in impeachment. It signed up former spies and prosecutors as contributors and dangled the hope that Robert Mueller would end Mr. Trump's presidency. But the Russia show came to a disappointing conclusion. For its audience, with Mr. Trump's acquittal on February 5th, the ratings plummeted. We didn't lose viewers, MSNBC's President Phil Griffin insisted in an interview. They may have taken a few days off from watching out of, oh boy, I've got to regroup. MSNBC's audience numbers did rebound with the coronavirus story, but the network's DNA is politics, and COVID-19 is not at its heart a political story. Rachel Maddow, the network's star, saw her audience in the 25 to 54 demographic, the one most prized by advertisers, fall below CNN's Chris Cuomo for the first time. Why? Chris Cuomo was doing late night comedy with his brother Andrew, gigantic novelty, oversized novelty cotton swabs, and pretending to be quarantined when we know he wasn't. So his ratings took off. People left confused. They were watching MSNBC, but nothing happened. And that was it. They had no idea what was going on anymore. And they went to watch something else. Here's what they say. We're using the same muscles that we use to cover politics, covering this pandemic and how the country's reacting, Mr. Griffin said. Behind the scenes, NBC's corporate dramas continue to unsettle its scattered staff. The new chairman of NBC Universal's news group, Cesar Condi, hasn't described his vision for news. He made his name with an insufficiently covered television group, coup, Telemundo's rise against Univision. They say, I don't care about all this stuff. What I'm interested in is the CNBC move. Here's what I think, man. Trump's winning. Conservatives are winning. And I think we're seeing it for obvious reasons. The narrative of the left is collapsing. They're resorting now to just running through the streets, burning things down. That's the language of the unheard, I guess. But it's the language of people who have no argument. They've tried saying what they had to say. They tried all of these things. None of it worked. Nothing changed. And that's their argument. Well, now people will listen to us. They go and smash and burn things. Meanwhile, when it comes to cash and money, CNBC sees something more lucrative. Conservatism, right-wing talk. The left is failed. The establishment has collapsed. The Democrats are over. This is what you get. They say the new NBC Universal chief executive, Jeff Shell, has suggested in private conversation that he wants to make a more dramatic change to the company's other cable news network, CNBC. Two NBC Universal executives said. Mr. Shell, the two executives said, is considering turning the network's primetime hours, currently occupied by Shark Tank reruns and business-focused reality programming like The Prophet, over to right-wing talk shows. A similar plan was floated years ago. A development executive even met with the talk radio flamethrower Mark Levin, a CNBC executive said, but it could allow Comcast to extend an olive branch to Mr. Trump and his avid supporters. CNN once positioned itself between MSNBC and Fox on the political spectrum. But during Mr. Trump's tenure, the network concluded that there was no profitable middle ground with a president who seeks confrontation with the media. The channel adopted an increasingly political focus, hosting dozens of Democratic primary town halls and debates. It also competes more directly with MSNBC than ever before for audience, offering Don Lemon and Mr. Cuomo as a more emotional, less cerebral alternative to Chris Hayes and Ms. Maddow. CNBC is displacing MSNBC. MSNBC, in my opinion, is on the verge of collapse. This is why the media is so desperate to pander to anyone willing to listen. MSNBC gave us nothing but crazy Russian conspiracy nonsense for years, and it came out to be nothing. So what do you think people are looking for now? Well, they hate Trump. CNN has capitalized on that. The Russiagate thing was propped up by both CNN and MSNBC. And this is where I think the two channels converged. MSNBC was giving us Russiagate. CNN was trying to be some kind of in-between. But when they started reporting on Russiagate, seeing their ratings spike, they became basically the same thing as MSNBC. Well, Rachel Maddow went nuts, desperately trying to veer away from CNN because CNN was taking their audience. And now CNN's basically run them off the road where they're so far weirdo conspiracy, nobody cares anymore. And their ratings plummeted. I mean, people still watch MSNBC, but you can see it when they're on the ground at riots defending them, what they've become. The media is driving this. And it's scary because in their desperation not to fail, they even support overt terror. I mean like low-level Antifa stuff, but it still is terror. Defending the rioting and ignoring the pleas of the actual people who are having their businesses destroyed. Fox News has been able to just take a massive presence because Russiagate was insane and regular people could see it was insane and didn't want to hear it. But things are changing, and I think Donald Trump has a lot to do with it. For the time being, you can expect the media to pander more to rioters. CNN will do it more. The New York Times will change their headlines. And that will create a weird division between the federal government, the actual law, and cable TV ratings. So when people are brainwashed by this nonsense, they'll eventually find themselves standing against law. And that's probably why a lot of these young people are going to prison. I'll leave it there. I got a couple more segments coming up for you in a few minutes, and I will see you all shortly.